It sounds odd, but this music plays in my head yet. Always quoting Looney Tunes or Half Baked. It is Orange and Blue today. It is Cecil Lammey. It is Andrew Mason. The triumphant return of Andrew Mason to the show. And Mace, so good to have you back, brother. From your travels, from the combine, the drills on Thursday and Friday. Like, we got to do a brain dump with you today, man. Like, what was it like? What did you experience? What were some of your main takeaways? And we'll kind of tie a bow on the combine. And then we got to jump into all these cuts and everything that's happening in the NFL today.
I'll tell you what, the NFL is trying to make the combine into an event, and it's a very interesting thing. I just want to kind of talk about the setup and all that. It's very interesting because I feel like we're having the NFL's version of an art versus commerce discussion here. Because look, the combine exists for a reason, and it's not commercial. It's about getting standardized numbers on these players, getting everybody in for a medical, and giving teams a chance to knock out a bunch of in-person interviews, right? It's designed to make things more efficient. But now you're turning it into this event, right? You've done it on television, but now you're letting people come and watch it every day. I mean, on Saturday, I think there were probably about 8,000 or 10,000 people there that were sitting behind one end zone in the corner. And yeah, there were some boos. Will Levis got some boos on Saturday. I kid you not. Like, yeah, because there are a lot of Colts fans there, obviously, and so they're watching quarterbacks closely. I think Colts fans probably fell a little bit more in love with Anthony Richardson than Will Levis. Although I would say watching Richardson, everyone's like, Gaga, he's as advertised. Okay. He's got the athleticism and the arm talent. He also, against air, missed some easy throws, missed some short to intermediate outs. I mean, it was the Anthony Richardson experience you saw on film. And so, I mean, for me, as I'm watching it, I'm saying, okay, what matches up on the film? What meshes? And if I see somebody that looks good, I'm kind of saying, okay, how does it work? Someone who jumped out, Aiden O'Connell had some good moments in the drills, right? Mm-hmm. But you and I saw him at the Shrine, and it wasn't impressive, right? Tyson Bagent out of Shepherd, the Division II quarterback, who we saw down at the Senior Bowl. There were a couple of flashes there, not real consistent. Well, he did very good against air. So, okay, so what happened in the Senior Bowl? Was it was just too big for him, and now Water's finding its level? He doesn't have a defense? Or are there some traits that you can work with? That's the kind of thing you're looking at. And of course, as I wrote about after the first day, I thought the first day of workouts might have been the key one for the Broncos, because it did underscore that there's some really good value on interior defensive line and some really good value on the edge. And I would be shocked, Cease, if they hang on to those 2 third-round picks. I'd be shocked if one of those 2 picks isn't used on an edge or an interior defensive lineman. I don't think it's going to be straight up O-line, because I think the value is actually going to be better at edge and interior D-line than on the O-line.
Yeah, 1,000%. And with the Richardson, everyone going gaga, it's like, well, and I'm not saying record setting, but we all knew he was going to test well. It's about passing. And look at what Stroud did as a passer. Like, and Stroud on film, backed up in person, like that's who CJ Stroud is. So great pass placement, great anticipation, leading his receivers, beautiful passes at all 3 levels of the field. With Richardson, wild. You're gonna get some wild horses. Like you gotta tame that a little bit. You got to develop that a little bit more than the plug and play you get from Bryce Young, who did not participate, and I don't think hurt his draft stock. And then from a CJ Stroud, who did exactly what we thought he would, which was look excellent. So the combine is fun, but I agree with you. It's not made for TV events, and they're kind of like trying to force it into that.
Yeah, and the worry that I have, Cease, is that we're going to see some things that become pretty standardized that get changed for the notion of playing to the crowd. Because I'll say this, like, if you were the NFL and you were looking at this from an event perspective for the fans, I don't know if it hit. Now, because, and I could see, I kept looking over at the stands, especially on Saturday, and seeing people got bored with it. And it's funny because when my daughter asked me kind of about the combine, I told her about it. And I said, the honest to goodness truth is, Charlotte, it's not the most entertaining thing to watch. It's informative. I think you get a lot out of it. I think you can see stuff in the drills, but it's it's laborious to sit through, right? There's a reason why you see coaches when they're watching the combine, they get up, they go at the back of the room, they go, you see TVs. I mean, sometimes they'll show the teams in their suites at Lucas Oil Stadium, and you'll see them looking up, watching a basketball game or something, right? I mean, it's like, oh, well, KU Texas is more entertaining than what we're seeing on the field. That's just
Right.
That's just sort of how it goes with this thing.
Belichick will be eating sunflower seeds. What was Belichick jumping on?
I think sunflower seeds
Sunflower
for him.
seeds,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, it's, but I mean, I would say this. I thought it confirmed some things we knew about some prospects. I thought that, there were a couple of guys I was hoping to do better. I wasn't all that impressed with Julius Brents out of K-State, for example. I thought he was just okay. But here's the thing. If they're just okay and they didn't rocket their way up, that's the sort of thing that helps the Broncos a little bit. I mean,
right. The last time we saw Brents play football, it looked good because he was at the Senior Bowl.
Right. And so if he didn't build off that to a great degree, if it was just kind of, and I thought it wasn't bad, it was just kind of up and down. But that's okay. That's fine. Because if Brents had been up, probably he sneaks into the second round, but he wasn't. Now you're talking about him being on the radar in round 3 when I think he might make a lot of sense. And I'd say the same thing for Terrell Smith, the guy that you and I liked a lot coming out of Minnesota and then going to the Shrine Bowl. I mean, it was a fine workout, but it wasn't anything that made anyone say, wow. And that's fine because for the Broncos' sake, you're rooting for some of these guys to not use the combine as a springboard. And I think the Broncos, if they're looking at certain players that you and I have talked about, most of these guys are still on the radar. Keanu Benton out of Wisconsin, defensive lineman, you and I had discussed. He could go late too. He could be there at pick 67. And if Draymond Jones doesn't come back, I think they need a guy like Keanu Benton on the roster.
Oh, they need Benton bad. Stills, right? Making some hay down there in Indianapolis as well.
Yeah, he had also a good RAS score, and I got into the RAS, and we'll discuss that more because the Broncos under George Payton tend to favor players who have high RAS, that's relative athletic score, that measures what the player is in terms of athletic testing. And it's not a be-all, end-all, but it's something that I think that the Broncos do use as a metric. And oh, by the way, one of the lowest RAS scores that they took, I think the second lowest RAS score of a player they've taken under George Payton, Montreal Washington. So we've seen some mistakes made when they go away from that.
And we'll move on from that. And I think RAS...
you don't want to go there, I know. But
I think I've said enough. Like, I think, and I definitely saw it on the text line last week when I was doing Denver Sports Tonight. People are like, enough. We get it. Tariq Woolen, we get it. Isaiah Pacheco, we get it. I was like, okay, I think I've made my point. But, like, I think RAS, I talked about it a little bit when you were gone, but, like, it's not be all end all, like you said, but it's a tool. Important number, and it's kind of an assembly of all different variables, and it's compared historically. I don't mind the Broncos using that sort of data whatsoever at all.
Yeah, not as the only thing, but I mean, it's one of those things where they definitely it's definitely part of the puzzle. If a guy's got great film and the skills translate, and he has a poor RAS because maybe he doesn't test well, then you'll account for that. And that's where you have a guy who could fall and be nice value. I mean, a good example of that would be 11 years ago, Danny Trevathan. The film was terrific. The athletic measurables were terrible. Okay, so you got him in round 6. Bargain, right? That's the thing. And you can be smart about that, I think. And also with RAS, I don't think you're like, oh wow, he got a 9.99. It's great. I think what you're saying is, okay, what's the baseline here? It's kind of like on the offensive line when you look at arm length and say, okay, if you've got a tackle with 32 and 1/4 inch arms, you know what? That dude's going to be a guard. Yeah,
right.
You have baselines. That's the thing. It's not like you're like, wow, we're going to take this guy because he had 33 bench press reps and the other guy had 32. No, as long as they hit a baseline, then everything on top of that's gravy.
Right, right. And it's an interesting number, and it's something like I've said, DVOA. You know, a lot of
Yeah.
people don't even understand DVOA, but if you do, you understand how important and relevant it is. Again, doesn't mean it's the be all end all, but yes, I think analytics need to be part of what you do. Film is the most important. It's way more important. The combine, I said, is maybe 5% or maybe even as low as 1% of your grade. What would you say the combine is for a prospect's grade?
I'd say the on-field stuff is maybe about 3%. But it varies, because if you have a medical concern, the combine medical evaluations, that could be like 50%, right? And ditto, if you interview poorly at certain positions, then it's going to have an outsized impact. What we see on the field in terms of the 40 times, that is actually has the least impact. I think if you get into the football drills, that's where you see something, and that's honestly like where you start being able to say, okay, this can translate. I thought the one thing about being able to actually see the football drills without them cutting away to interview, whoever was promoting what in the press box with Rick Shiza and Daniel Jeremiah, whoever's in the booth, whatever, actually being able to concentrate on the drills and watch, I thought was the best thing for me, even though I would say it just tended to confirm a lot of what we picked up in the previous months.
Right, right. And an average combine performance, maybe even some would say below average combine performance, does not mean that a prospect can't play or it kills his draft stock or anything like that. Like, that's not what it means whatsoever. I wrote about it in Mile High Monday today at denversports.com. I wrote about CJ Stroud. I wrote about Anthony Richardson. And then most importantly, I wrote about perhaps the number one tight end in a great tight end class. What are there, 3 tight ends in the first round, maybe 4?
Yeah.
I think Musgrave deserves to go in the first round. I think he should. But Michael Mayer, the Notre Dame tight end, had, pretty quote unquote pedestrian numbers. But then you look at his numbers compared to Travis Kelce, Jason Witten, Mark Andrews, Rob Gronkowski, TJ Hawkinson, Greg Olsen, like he's going to be fine. I think. And his pro day, like if he comes out and has a little bit better 40 time on his pro day, the Mayer's going to be fine. Like, let's not overblow this thing.
And let's face it, we've sort of gotten sucked in here in Broncos country to the siren song of the 4-5 tight end, right? And the results, I would say some of it is coaching and use of player,
very much,
but
so.
The results haven't been there. But that's also to me, I would also say some of that comes down to coaching. And we saw in the last 2 weeks what coaching tailored to the player can do, because we saw Albert Okwuegbunam look like a different player in those last 2 games, when instead of going for the one size fits all style, it was, all right, this guy needs he needs an arm around the shoulder rather than a kick in the ass, right? So let's give him that figuring out what each player responds to. That's good coaching. And that's something that I think the Broncos have somewhat lacked. And I think Sean Payton and his staff will do much better at that, because he comes from the Parcellsian school of, I'm going to treat you fairly, but we're not going to treat you the same, because Bill understood and understands that different players need different motivational styles. And he did well at figuring that out. Sean Payton has done well at figuring that out with his players. And that's why, there are some guys he's going to be the reassuring, dad to. And there are some guys he's going to be the tough dad to. But that's going to be based on what he figures out works for each player. So I think they'll handle Albert O correctly, and I think you'll see better results from him this year.
I think it'll be fantastic. Now, before we put the combine to bed and then talk about one of your latest coming up at denversports.com in terms of Saints releases, Saints making some news today. I do want to ask you just super, super quick. I believe, and tight end is on this list. I think running back is on this list. There's other positions, safety. Based on who the Broncos had formal interviews with, and just based on your feel about this roster, are there any surprise positions? Because so many people think you're fine because you have Greg Dulcich, and God bless Greg Dulcich, but I'd say you're not fine at that position, and adding a tight end will be something the Broncos look to do this offseason. Are there any positions that spring forward for you along with tight end, that may surprise the casual Broncos fan. But no, they really have a need here.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, safety, I'd like to think it wouldn't surprise people, but I think it would. But here's the thing. We're talking about deep safety. This is not a good safety class, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that was actually one thing that did jump out to me over the last several weeks is as a whole, this group of safeties, there's not much there.
No.
So this honestly, like I look at safety and I think maybe the best play for the Broncos is get Caden Stearns ready, but maybe you do sign Kareem Jackson to another 1 year incentive laden contract just to make sure you've got your rear end covered at the position with somebody, because it's looking at this class, I don't see anybody that's going to come in and potentially immediately help. You might get some special teamers, but that's all. You've got guys
What
like
about
that on the
Von
roster.
Bell? Super quick before we move on,
Yeah.
but like Von Bell, it was NFL.com's Nick
Yeah.
Shook that wrote about that, and I tweeted about it yesterday. Like, Von Bell,
Maybe,
interesting.
yeah, it's interesting, but yeah, tight end shouldn't surprise anybody because we just talked about Albert O, but he's in the last year of his contract. Greg Dulcich has got to prove that he can stay healthy, and we don't know about that at all, and we don't know what he can do as a blocker yet. And again, the best thing the Broncos can do this year is not draft for immediate need and instead draft for value and draft and make sure they're getting the best possible value and not worry about position. Okay. And that's why now, if you let Draymond Jones go, the Venn diagram might cross over neatly there at the top of round 3 for an interior defensive lineman. But let's talk about edge rusher, because that's a position that someone said to me they thought the Broncos were stacked at edge. And I'm like, no. I know what stacked looks like. Stacked is like 2015, 2016 Broncos, right? This group is not stacked. So I think the edge rusher that you get at 67, 68 is going to be better than the guy you got at 64 last year in Nick Bonito. The quality is better. So again, that's why I've come from out of the last few weeks. I'm stoked about the edge crop. I'm stoked about the interior defensive line crop, but I'm cool on the interior offensive line crop once you get to the range the Broncos are taking. If you were sitting there with a pick at 40, I'd be stoked. I'd be like, yeah, get yourself an O lineman. I mean, I'm looking. And this will be a kind of a little segue to what I wrote about on the interior offensive line. I'm not sure that the worst move isn't to try to take Andrus Peat off the Saints' hands and see if you can get him healthy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And use that to try to upgrade your interior offensive line. So I think, so you mentioned tight end, another position, again, I'll just go back to edge. I think the Broncos are looking very hard at edge, and that may surprise a lot of people, but if you really understand roster construction and where this draft is deep, where the Broncos are picking, I would say it shouldn't surprise you at all. And that's where we talk about Dante Stills. Stills could be really intriguing, Cease, because at 287, maybe he's the sort of guy who's that tweener, but you might be able to make the most out of. You just say, okay, what's the best spot for you? And you kind of first you cross train him and then you lock him into one spot.
Yeah, I think it'd be great for the Broncos to consider that. And this draft class is shaping up where, okay, some of your largest needs, edge specifically, you're going to have some options there.
Yeah.
And it may sound crazy to some, but if they took 2 edges in the 3rd round, I'd be okay with that. Like they need that sort of
premium position. They need it. I mean, look, I love Baron Browning. I love the skills that he has.
Right.
But we don't know if he's going to become a number 1 edge rusher. Okay. We don't know that. We don't know that Randy Gregory is ever going to make it through more than 12 games in the season. Okay. We don't know that. And then we don't know if Nick Bonito is ever going to learn how to set the edge properly. Okay. So boom, boom, boom. I've just named 3 guys that have huge question marks, right? I mean, this is, it's a group that's got some intriguing players, but there's nobody I'm saying if I'm game planning the Broncos, and this is the value of self-scouting. You self-scout, you get a real good evaluation. You have your offensive coaches evaluate the defense evaluate the offense. If I'm an offensive coach looking at the Broncos and I'm looking at the edges, I'm like, that's nothing I'm concerned about. When I look at the Broncos defense last year, pass rusher wise, once Bradley Chubb was gone, the guy that worried me the most was Draymond Jones, and Draymond may not be there.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's I actually don't envy Vance Joseph right now, even though he's got an all-pro corner, which is helpful, but he's got a lot of questions in that front seven.
Yeah, and it's not just as good as like, oh, just do what you did last year. Like, no, there's some concerns. And if someone hits, if Baron Brownie does it, great. Look at all these rumored trades. The Broncos are shopping Cortland Sutton. You're not getting anything for him. You shop all these guys, you're not getting much unless it's going to sting, like a Simmons, maybe Garrett Bowles get you a little something. But like, so for people who are like, the Broncos are shopping, like, they're not their guys aren't going to get you anything. I've gotten questions on Twitter like, what would the Broncos get for nothing of value? So if you add talent and then that talent flourishes, either the talent you had or the talent you acquired, great. Now you've got tradable assets.
Yeah, I mean, this Cortland Sutton's a player that, with all respect to Broncos country, I think people around here kind of overvalue him. In terms, the reality is he hasn't been close to the same player since the ACL. He's a he's a catch in traffic guy, right? He's not a separation guy, and because of that, and because of the contract relative to the production, I think if you get a 5th round pick for Cortland Sutton, you're probably pretty happy with it, and you make that deal. And that may sound like, oh man, that's not enough. But that's also the problem with trading a player when their value is low. They traded Bradley Chubb when his value was at his apex, and that's how they got the pick that they turned into Sean Payton, right? I mean, that's effectively they trade Bradley Chubb for Sean Payton. That's not the worst deal in the world. But it's possible because they made the deal when after Chubb had proven that he was back on track, right? Trading Cortland Sutton now would have been like if you traded Bradley Chubb last offseason when he was coming off a no-sack year and had injury concerns. You would have been lucky to get a 3rd round pick for Bradley Chubb then, but you waited, you let the value rise, and he got back to being a 1st round pick. And so that's why, like with Cortland Sutton, I feel like you're trading him just to try to clear some space, but you're not going to get some cap space, but you're not going to get real value out of him because you're trading him you're trading him at his low point rather than at his apex. The old baseball adage, you want to trade a guy at his peak. Maximize the value. As I had a spring training game I was on in the background here while I was working today, so I'm in a baseball mood today.
Yeah, always in a baseball mood. So you're
wearing a hockey sweatshirt. So I mean,
were you writing about? I felt you were cheating on me, Mace. I was like, I saw something on DenverSports.com. I was like, wait, that's Mace. You wrote
I wrote about Brad Hand joining the Rockies, and
the Rockies, yeah.
And if I was busy yesterday because I was doing some stuff with my daughter.
Because you used a Mr. Hand reference, and I'm like, none of the youngsters on DenverSports.com know Fast Times at Richmond High.
Wait. Actually, I think Jake Shapiro.
Did he write that?
Said it in no, he didn't write the story, but he mentioned in the text chain. I'd already kind of, I would have gotten there myself, but yeah, like Fast Times has had some staying power, by the way.
Yes.
As a cultural touchstone.
If I'm here and you're here, isn't it really our time?
Our time, yes. I view this show as our time. I view it as you, me, and the viewer. This is not your time. It's not my time. It's our time. We're sharing it. It's I'll do another thing. Remember Chasing Amy?
I love Chasing Amy.
Shared moment.
You shared a moment.
And that was a shared moment.
My friend. Because she loves me.
Yes.
She loves me.
If you know, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would have.
Mother's a tracer.
But yeah, there was. I would have written the Mike Moustakas story yesterday, but I wanted to actually hang out with my daughter for a little bit. But yeah, actually, I'm writing Rocky stuff whenever something comes up, and periodically, yeah, am I cheating? Yeah, I'm just scratching an itch. I like baseball. There you go. That's okay.
You gotta do that, baby.
Rocky stories get surprisingly good traffic. We found, by the way.
Okay.
So
good.
Hey,
good.
They're deep. Hey, I'll say it before. I've said it before. I'll say it again. In the Denver sports universe, it doesn't seem that way because the Rockies are so down and people are so frustrated. But there is the only thing that rivals a big Broncos season is when the Rockies went to the World Series. So to me, the Rockies are the number 2 team in town. People hope. There's deep within everyone being so, having such resentment of the Monforts, there is a reservoir of hope that if the Rockies could just put it together and tap into, we'd see it go like a fireball like it has in the past. So anyway, that's my soapbox. I'll see everyone at Coors Field next month.
My soapbox is Rocktober only happened once. It's like that Daffy Duck magic trick.
Yeah.
You can only do it once.
I know.
You've got magic on your latest at denversports.com. I am professional.
Mhm.
What do you think of Jameis Winston joining the Broncos? Well, you wrote about the Saints who need some salary cap relief because they have Derek Carr as their new quarterback. And Jameis Winston behind Russell Wilson sounds like a good deal to me, Mace, but he's not the only one off the Saints roster. You highlighted several players that the Broncos could be considering to follow Sean Payton to the Mile High City, and some really good names.
Yeah, I mean, let's start with the big name of Michael Thomas. And the Saints did something with Thomas's contract that said that if he's on the roster on March 17th, so what is today? Is today the 6th? If he's on the roster in 11 days, his 2024 roster bonus becomes fully guaranteed. Okay. They're not going to want that. So a move on Michael Thomas is probably coming and was set up by this move that they made back in January to be able to, and they did it in time to spread the cap hit of cutting him over 2 years. But Thomas has only played 3 games in the last 2 seasons. I'll say this, Cease, he had 3 touchdowns in those 3 games. When he's healthy, he's still there. But the question on him is health. But we just talked about Cortland Sutton, right? If the Broncos trade Cortland Sutton, do they bring in a Michael Thomas on, does Sean Payton convince them to sign a prove it type of deal? I'd say one that's really intriguing, but I think is less possible is Cam Jordan on the edge. Still a really good player, even though he's going into year 13.
Yes.
But the thing is, because he's still an effective player and a durable player, he's only missed 2 games in his career. Incredibly durable, still very effective. He had 8.5 sacks last year, but I think you can count on him being a 10-sack guy again this year. Because of that, I don't think the Broncos have the draft capital to make the type of deal that some other teams are going to make. So I think they'd probably lose out. I mentioned Andrus Peat earlier. Marshawn Lattimore, another name keep an eye on. Alvin Kamara, if they want to go vet at running back, they could. The Saints, if they do a post-June 1 trade of Kamara, they will clear $10 million of cap space. A post-June 1 release would clear just under $10 million of cap space. So that's a name to keep your eye on. You wouldn't want to pay very much for running back going into year 7, but he could be on the radar. I did mention Ryan Ramczyk as well, Cease, but the reality is based on the restructure they did on Ramczyk, there's not a real benefit to cutting him. They basically set that up to bring Ramczyk back.
Right. It's a pipe dream for the Broncos, but
yeah,
one that would be interesting to think about. And the Kamara thing would be interesting, and then you got to worry about him getting suspended.
Right, exactly. So that's why I think they'll go in other directions, and I think the Broncos can get better value at looking elsewhere at running back. Oh, by the way, it shouldn't surprise anybody, but running back is a position the Broncos were looking at the combine very heavily. So I know we've talked about free agent running backs, but you and I have talked about draft running backs. We've talked about Tyjae Spears a lot. They talked to some other running backs at the combine. I think it's more likely they're not looking for an Alvin Kamara. They're looking for the next Alvin Kamara in this draft class.
Right. And this draft class will have that depth at running back, just like the depth at edge, interior defensive line. There are some spots. And they did look at Jamie Robinson as well.
Yeah.
But you have to decide, like, is he a safety or is he a slot corner? Because he can do both. And he just made the switch for 1 year of safety play at Florida State. So, they did look at a safety, but is he a safety or not? Adding talent.
Or is he a tweener? Is he someone you move around? And look, one thing about Vance Joseph is that over time, he figured out how to use Isaiah Simmons in Arizona. And obviously that's a front 7 player more, although he can drop back into coverage as well. But the lesson there is I think Vance Joseph comes to Denver with some, and this is a positive, some unconventional views on how to use different types of players and have them handling different kinds of roles. I think there are coaches who are afraid of those types of players. Vance Joseph isn't. And we'll be able to put a player like that in someone, again, kind of like we were talking about with Dante Stills. The word you heard on Stills in Indianapolis was tweener, and that can be a dreaded word. But if you have a coach who knows how to put players in the right position and is willing to move those pieces around, a tweener can be very helpful for you. And we saw on the tape, and we saw at the Shrine, that someone like Dante Stills, he might be a tweener, a little small for an interior, a little big for an edge, but the dude just makes plays. He's a force out there.
Yeah, he's a force, and interior pressure is a killer for anyone.
Yeah.
Just a brief history lesson, and there's so many more, Mace, but I remember when two guys from CSU were considered tweeners. One was named Joey Porter. The other was named Clark Higgins. Yeah. And both of them were like Pro Bowl caliber players for, 10 years or whatever with the Steelers.
Of course you mentioned the Steelers, right? I mean, that's,
Hey, I got Joey Porter Jr. out there running drills, right? Thinking about Joey Porter. So I'm like, hey, Joey Porter, right?
When he popped on the scoreboard, because they showed the broadcast in the without sound, you had to like download an app and hear the sound. When I saw him up there, I almost started humming the Steeler polka, you know that. We're from the town with the great football team. We love them, Pittsburgh Steelers. It's
I think every team needs a polka. There's the Packers polka.
Yeah, but the thing is, it was based off the tune of the Pennsylvania polka. That's why it made sense. And if you saw Groundhog Day out there watching, you've heard the Pennsylvania polka, because that's the song that is played at Gobbler's Knob every day, that by the end of the movie, you're humming like da 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 da. And they took that and wrote some Steeler lyrics to it. And they've done like 3 versions of it over the years, right? They updated about every couple of decades or so for the current players. I mean, if the Steelers go 12-5 this year, there's going to be a version that's got Kenny Pickett's name in it, right?
Right, so. Right. You need yourself a polka. You need yourself an orange and blue today, Monday through Friday, 3:30 p.m. Mountain Time. He is Andrew Mason. I got a ton to get to this week and leading you up to and through the NFL draft. So everyone stay tuned each and every day. Do all those YouTube things. Help us out. Like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you never miss a vid. He is Andrew Mason. You follow him on Twitter at Mace Denver. I am at Cecil Lammey, saying, and until next time, be safe, be kind, know that you are appreciated. Stay tuned. As always, stay frosty, baby.